Hey everyone, it has been a while, but thank you for taking a stop and pulling into the Palmetto Pit Stop. We are talking the upcoming 2025 NASCAR season, and I am Tony, here with Adam. A lot to get to as we're just going to have some early news and notes for the upcoming season before we get to the Clash in North Carolina, starting out the season, and it's just an exciting time with some of these changes going in NASCAR. We want to continue to see things grow into this upcoming year, and just like any other platforms, just like any other shows and podcasts and media, want to be able to be good stewards for that and make a little bit of noise ourselves here in South Carolina, and hopefully one day be able to connect with y'all out there. Adam, I know you're very excited for the upcoming months as we pivot back to NASCAR season. It's hard to believe.
It's been a long and short season, off season. Obviously, NASCAR having one of the shortest off seasons of any American sport. We've only been probably off the air for 2 months, and already our first episode back, first episode of basically season 2. Extremely excited. So much is going to look different for the sport in 2025. Obviously, Martin Truex no longer full time. Very familiar name, leaving the sport, giving it one more shot at the 500 before calling it a career on full-time racing. A lot of sponsors left. Some sponsors jumped around. We have a bunch of rule changes. Maybe not the rule changes we wanted to see. Got some really new cars going to be out there with the way drivers were dispersed after the closing of Stewart Haas. A lot to get into, and very, very excited to sort of make a bridge episode of this podcast from last off season to when we eventually start talking about the Clash in depth.
It's just more of a matter of wanting to catch up with things, as you stated, because it has been a while, and you go through the holidays, you get into that mentality of other sports, of basketball and football and playoffs and everything else, but now just trying to focus on this and get everyone ready. We want to be able to have that ability to get to as many races as we are able to. Of course, we are in and based out of Columbia, South Carolina, right in the middle of the state. So luckily, where we live in this part of the country, we have a lot of incredible tracks that are within easy driving distance of us. So that is fantastic. And we want to be able to get some behind-the-scenes audio and video in and see some things through our eyes, especially just between the sense of you being more of that in-depth NASCAR fan for a good while, and me still even getting some of my bearings and getting some of the ropes just tied down for myself. And that's all going to be something going into the season that's still coming along with these changes, with more sponsors leaving, with some of these household names and guys getting older, and more new names popping up with some of these younger and fresher teams with, a lot of guys. There's a little bit more of that youth movement that more newfound NASCAR fans can try to latch on to, and we'll see where the season goes, and also just where more of a maybe media output is going to be, especially in that digital sense. TV is still around. That's still where you're going to be getting the majority of your viewers for these races, but still just trying to get a little bit more of the word out there. Like, hey, give NASCAR a shot if you've walked away from it. If you're a younger fan, you're interested in cars at all, interested in racing, make some memories. Maybe you'll see some good stories, see some great moments, and that's something we want to try to foster here as we look on to this upcoming season.
Yeah, growing up, I got into really watching NASCAR because I went to Lowe's one day and Jimmy Johnson's car was there. I had no idea who Jimmy Johnson was, but I saw a race car. I was intrigued, of course, and found out what was called then the Budweiser Shootout was that night. And so went home, asked my parents if we could put it on the family TV.
There you go.
And that night, the only driver I recognized was Jeff Gordon. So I thought I was going to be a Jeff Gordon fan. And I said, whoever wins this race, I said, I'll be a Jeff Gordon fan. I know him. I had a Jeff Gordon lamp in my bedroom. And he was the only guy I knew. And then Jeff Gordon crashed that race. So I said, well, whoever I'm a fan of, or I'll be a fan of whoever wins this race. A race that wasn't even points paying. Tony Stewart ends up winning to this day. Huge Tony Stewart fan. Very heartbroken at the end of last year when Stewart-Haas closed its doors for good, going back to the Haas factory team. But still pulling for Stewart. I'm glad I get to see him in drag racing every once in a while when the race ends and they cut to the NHRA. But lots. You don't expect the memories that you make with certain races. I tune in for the 2007 Daytona 500 because it's the first points race of the year, and it ends up being one of the greatest Daytona 500s of all time, with like all-time finish with Kevin Harvick passing Mark Martin side by side, that huge crash behind him at a turn 4. And then from then on, I was just hooked. It did kind of stink for someone who's still, as a fan, not a huge supporter of Hendrick, pretty much going in right in the middle of Jimmy Johnson's dominance, but still getting to see that Tony Stewart 2011 championship. You just don't know the memories you're going to make when you watch these sports, and they're just, NASCAR is in an interesting spot right now where the racing is really getting back to quality week in and week out. It just needs the tweaks. It's almost there. It is like the rest of the ingredients are there. They just need to make the cake. And, we have fans who are still upset with the playoff system, some upset with the car, the way it races, some of the drivers. But the NASCAR, especially with the rule changes they've made, it seems like they are listening after all. I mean, the biggest change that I think was the changes to the DVP, the damaged vehicle policy. Mm-hmm. No more. It used to be after a set amount of time, I believe it was 5 minutes, if you couldn't fix your car in that time frame, you were done, you were sent to the garage, your day was over. Now, teams are given that window on pit road, and if they exceed that window, they have to go back to the garage, but their day is not over until they declare it over. So they are able to fix up their cars. And even if they come back, 50, 60, 100 laps down, they're still going to go back out there. We might get a return to the zombie cars we've seen back in the day with the one race, Dale Jr. Ripped off the front of his left front, I think, and it ended up helping him at Martinsville because he was getting cool air on the tire. Or even Mark Martin, there's a very famous picture of his car so duct taped up they had to paint a number 6 on the side.
That's
it's
incredible.
just very, very cool moment in NASCAR to see these zombie cars that are going to be coming back. I know a casual fan may not care. It's like, okay, this guy's 100 laps down, who cares about him? I'm a big fan of that. I love how those cars look. I'll be interested to see if we do see some of those zombie cars out there. With how this next-gen car kind of falls apart in weird ways and the crumple zones and all that. But I see probably one of the biggest changes announced. Another one being they're letting driver provisionals for one race, basically a one-race ticket where world-class drivers, as it's described, can come in and they're automatically qualified, as we're seeing with Trackhouse, with Helia, the IndyCar, 4-time Indy 500 winner, coming in, racing in the Daytona 500. It's going to be really interesting. I mean, we've seen a bunch of guys just come in from across the world, especially the last few years. These world-class drivers from across the world come in and compete, and of course the most popular being Shane Van Gisbergen, who's now taken his one race provisional and turned it into a new career now that he has left the world of supercars. So truly one of the greatest drivers on the planet to come in from already winning championships in supercars, now coming over being a full-time NASCAR driver.
Yeah, I'm going to make in some more fans here in the United States, and his name stands out. He's a little bit more not too outspoken. Just hearing him in interviews, a little bit more on the humble side, I would say, but interesting to see him with Trackhouse, just how that might shape him between sponsors, between the team's owner, just between the different styles and different things he's going to have to adapt to. I think it is going to be really fun to see just the infusion of, yet again, some of those new faces, those new guys, interesting names that might stand out. It's like, oh, Shane Van Gisbergen, who's that guy? For anyone who's not interested in racing, it's like, okay, I could maybe root for that guy. It's like, all right.
he's a real likable guy.
Of
We
course.
saw his battle with not Chase Briscoe, Chris Buescher, excuse me,
I was gonna say
at
Buescher.
Watkins Glen.
Yeah, WGI, that's right.
Where his crew chief even said, "It's like you might have to move him," and then Shane Van Gisbergen says, "I'm gonna do it clean." So real world class guy, both in terms of talent and respect for his fellow competitors. And a few years ago, Kyle Busch gave a quote where he's like, "These new guys just don't have respect for their competitors," and so it's good to see someone like Shane Van Gisbergen who can move you, but he would prefer to race you clean. And we've seen him in the Xfinity Series tearing up the road courses. He was in it every time, basically every race. Shane Van Gisbergen was towards the front every single time. So we'll really be seeing him in his full-time season. He could be a lock for Rookie of the Year if he qualifies for it. He's already won at the Chicago Street Race. Of course, they go there again. He looked like he was off to a good start last year before his crash. Now he gets Coda, he gets Watkins Glen, he gets Sonoma, he gets all of those, all the road courses this year. So, and with a full-time ride, could be taking away a playoff spot from someone who might just points their way in, and it'll be great to see how he develops on ovals. I mean, imagine Shane Van Gisbergen, three-time supercar champion, winning the Daytona 500. Like, that would be easily have to be one of the greatest drivers of all time at that point.
To see if he could actually transition to that point, but easily could see him being there in the playoffs just straight up because he can win a road course. And just with the current structure, as long as you get that one win, you're going to be in the playoff. Yeah, that might not be something that could help you out down the road, and maybe then you fall back as a part of the playoff because you were just really good on the road courses and still just average in more of the ovals. So that's all going to be something that plays a factor, especially getting down to just more of the bubble of the playoff and just have a little bit more of that sense of interest and intrigue. And then we'll see how things are going to be shaping up as we get to that point. But still a long ways away. A lot of road courses. Well, a lot more of ovals. But then with all the road course and everything mixed in, still going to be having a lot of different views, a lot of great cities, a lot of great tracks as we try to see who's going to come out on top this year, because it's going to be an interesting mix in the field.
Yeah, odd year season, so we can probably write out Joey Logano.
Yeah, that's right.
He'll chase his fourth next year, likely.
Yeah, of course.
This year he might just coast in the back as he has done on these odd years for some reason. But as we were talking about the playoffs, a very interesting rule change is that they are no longer offering waivers to drivers who miss races for any reasons that aren't medically related. So something like getting suspended will dock you of your playoff eligibility, and that's a big one, a big issue. We had not an issue, but it was a topic of conversation with Kyle Larson running the double last year, doing it again this year. Missed this Coke 600 because of weather, and it took about a week before he got his playoff eligibility granted, and now it's a situation where he likely wouldn't get that waiver. And then there's also the stipulation of suspensions. We've seen a few suspensions in the last few years that were granted waivers. The big one I can think of was Chase Elliott when he hooked Denny Hamlin. He missed races earlier in the year due to injury, came back, and then at the Coke 600, hooked Denny Hamlin into the wall. One race suspension there. You wouldn't see... It would be a huge controversy. That happens this year. Chase Elliott gets suspended. Most popular driver in the sport doesn't make the playoffs because of a suspension. So it seems NASCAR is taking that very seriously. I think it's a good call for that because you are just... It is very dangerous to be right-hooking people like that. Saw it with Austin Dillon when he, dive bombed Joey Logano and then turned Denny Hamlin, and that was the hardest hit taken in the next-gen car. So it's gonna be, it's a case-by-case thing, and I think it has potential to not be used well, but I'm really hoping that NASCAR is consistent in how they rule these things. On suspensions, they've kind of held up a very similar thing, like if you right hook somebody or intentionally wreck them. Like, there's of course revenge for stuff, and we've seen it in NASCAR where it's kind of a self-policing issue. Like, you door somebody and they'll kind of door you back, or back in the day they'd like spin you through the grass or something, and that's just something you duke out yourselves. The fight a few years ago between Noah Gragson and Ross Chastain.
Yeah.
It's NASCAR intentional wrecks tend to be self-policing issues, and NASCAR has usually let the boys have at it.
Kind of like hockey a little bit.
Yeah, they
if you wanted to, if you wanted, get in each other's face, you don't want to be doing anything criminal, of course, but to a point.
Yeah, you don't want. I'm perfectly okay with drivers hashing it out. I mean, these are a bunch of competitive guys who give 110% every single lap, and the tempers are going to rise. We've seen it in completely ordinary positions. I mean, a few years ago, Kyle Larson doors Bubba Wallace, and then he just hangs a left down the track, takes him out, and ends both their day. He gets suspended, and then after he gets out of the car, he goes after him, starts pushing Larson around. So people get heated, and we're gonna see it. But in a situation like Bubba's, it was rational that he would get the suspension for right hooking someone into the wall. But I'm just hoping it's not going to soften up the I don't want to say dirty driving, but the rough driving, because there is times where it can get a little rough, like moving somebody or hitting someone in the door, stuff like that. But that's kind of thing's exciting for fans. You just need to know where the line is.
That's going to be a really big point of emphasis, because as we're discussing this and as you look into the parts of these races where people are really tuning in for the most, it's going to be some of those moments. Drivers, getting in each other's faces, but, getting into each other's cars. And at some point of the race, getting to where you're going to have these battles, causing some wrecks, because those are the moments that get more of those shares on social media, that get more of your attention when you're watching on TV. Maybe you're in another room, maybe you're fixing some food while the race is going on, and you hear in the background crash happening. You're going to run back to the TV to see what's going on. So it has to be the fine line of drivers being able to have just a little bit of a better accountability and just trying to do these things as clean as possible. Because there's definitely a point where you have it as a skill as a driver when you're going into these battles, when you're fighting for position, and you're not just intentionally taking someone out. You got to make sure you're on the other side of that fine line and not just being a dirty driver out there. Even though you could easily get caught up with the adrenaline, caught up in a race, you have to make sure that you're going to be a little bit more accountable for yourself now. But, to a point, because we still want to have, these great moments, and wrecks are going to happen. You're still going to have, points during the season where a chunk of the field gets taken out, because that's just, you have
racing.
That's racing. That's part of what it is. It's part of what you signed up for. It's just going through it in, I guess just saying it as much finesse as you can, I suppose.
I guess that's the only way you can really put it. Like I said, I don't want to see these revenge crashes. I don't want them gone, because NASCAR's a sport, but all sports are entertainment, and these fights are entertaining. And obviously, you don't want people getting hurt, but there's going to be some roughhousing. You're bumping street metal at 200 miles an hour. The tempers are going to be running high. And you don't want to see it completely taken out of the sport where everyone just gets out of their car and, bows their head and just goes about their day. You want to see their personality.
Let's go racing, pal. Put it
racing.
there. Put it there.
Like, that's a darn shame. Drat.
Darn tootin'.
Yeah. But,
Let's go grab a beer.
Like, Tony Stewart was, back in the day, one of the hottest head drivers you can be. I mean, he was picking fights with Matt Kenseth, who was a real quiet dude, very rarely got into it with anyone on his own accord.
See, even I knew that. He's just a very reserved fella.
Kept to himself, other than that one Joey Logano crash. You had he was kind of like almost a big brother of the garage at points, where after that crash with Joey Logano and Denny Hamlin at California, Tony Stewart went over and roughed him up a little. You want to have those drivers. You love to see it. It's just the line is when someone can get hurt, then you're like, okay, let's ease off of this. And I think that's going to be the first suspension we see of a full-time driver is going to really set the tone of what NASCAR is going to permit and what they are going to say. We're not okay with that.
It's trial and error and just more, even to the point as a driver, just of observation to see what is going to be that line. What can you get away with? And because you still want to be able to have these battles with other drivers, you still want to be able to fight for position and not just think that you're always going to be under a scope or always just under a close eye of NASCAR. Like, okay, so what am I able to do? Am I actually going to be able to go for this win, or is it going to be something that's going to cause me to be suspended or dock playoff points, or what's going to happen to me as a driver? So, yeah, this is definitely something that we will see progress, and it's just one of those hands-on things. One thing I always like to say with certain jobs, you can only understand certain things. You can only accomplish certain tasks in a hands-on sense. Practice makes perfect. You have to actually do it in real life. And it's really only something on paper that, it's there for us to use as a reference. But to actually see it play out in races, even as someone analyzing it, someone is just a casual fan, it's only something that you can get a better feel for getting further into the season.
Yeah, this is a whole new mess that is going to be sort of cleaned up as the season goes on, just see where things lie. The biggest change that we didn't see, that we thought there would be some amendment to, was the playoff format. As it turns out, there's no changes at the moment. Apparently, it's been said that it's not completely off the table, but as of now, there have been no changes to the playoffs. Biggest criticism of the sport in the last 10 years has been the playoff system it's run its course. It's time to, pat it on the head, kiss it goodnight, basically. It just doesn't really belong in motorsports. NASCAR is not like in any other sport. We saw college football playoffs work out very well, producing some exciting moments in games. And in a sport where there's only two teams on the field at a time, a playoff works. But when you're racing every single competitor every single week, then it's, where we can kind of figure it out over the course of a full season. Yeah. We don't need a playoff.
No, it's at that point it's just like, all right, forget about everyone who didn't make the playoff. We're gonna do a drag race now. We're gonna have a bracket of 16 drivers. All right, we're doing drag racing now. It's 2v2. And then we're just going to keep doing that until we have a winner. Or at least maybe until you get to the Final Four. Then go put those guys back out on the track to race each other. It's just, it gets a little bit muddy because you have, these cars that are already assigned to the playoff and they qualify. But then you still have everyone else in the field. So it's like, you don't make the playoff, but you're not home. You're not sitting on the couch. You're still finishing out the season. So it does just make it a little bit confusing for someone getting into the sport. Like, oh, well, why are all these guys out there? I thought this was the playoff. Mm-hmm. It's like, no, it's just these drivers are the one racing for the playoffs. So I'm sure some changes are going to be made. There's going to be tweaks. Nothing's perfect. There's, obviously there's some formats of NASCAR that a lot of fans, past or present, saw as perfect and didn't want it to be changed. But, we're here now. We'll see where we're going to go from now, but perhaps, just to simplify things. It's not always the worst thing.
Not at all. I think NASCAR has something good in this next-gen car. We've seen it on the mile and a half, usually always producing really good racing. The weird thing comes with the short tracks. Martinsville ended up being a very, very good race up until, again, controversy kind of muddied the waters with the race manipulation that happened with William Byron and the other Chevys not letting Brad Keselowski go, and then the half wall ride for Christopher Bell. That whole thing, we had to wait 20 minutes to find out who was in the playoffs, and at that point you're like, okay, we're gonna hand pick whose season ended today, and it's very, very annoying. They did make a rule change about that, like a kind of tweak to the 100% rule, where it was just like any intentional manipulation of the race will be penalized now. So, but as you mentioned, you did make a joke about a tournament. There will be the introduction of the NASCAR in-season tournament. This was kind of Denny Hamlin's brainchild because during the summer months, The track lineup kind of, it's okay. Rating kind of fade a little in that long summer stretch, so he came up with that in-season tournament. I'm reading this right from Wikipedia. So it says the tournament will consist of 8 regular season races that will be run during June and July. All tournament races will count towards the regular season, and playoff standing is normal. For the first 3 races, all full-time drivers in the series are eligible to compete. Race winners are automatically qualified for the bracket, joined by the drivers that best finish in any of the 3 races. So it is a bracket. So each driver faces another driver in the bracket, sort of March Madness style, and best finishing driver keeps moving on in these tiers. And then the winner of the tournament will be given a $1 million bonus. This is all on TNT. You mentioned earlier, like the streaming platforms. We are going to see something with the Coke 600 broadcast on Amazon Prime this year, which is something that fans have mixed feelings on. I mean, everyone has gone to some form of streaming in terms of sports now. We saw on Christmas, Netflix was streaming the Christmas games for the NFL. That was very unique. Oddly enough, it worked way better than I thought it would after that Mike Tyson fight had so many lagging issues. The NFL games ended up being not only great, but like super crystal clear. It looked like it was like 4K broadcast or something. But it kind of, NASCAR has a very, I want to say, old-fashioned fan base. And they kind of all want their races on one channel, and it makes it a lot easier if you can just, what race is it on, or what channel is a race on? Be like, TNT or CW or whatever. It would make it a lot easier if fans could just have it on one deal, but it's NASCAR still trying to find their footing there in the media market. But in terms of that, we had some good news confirmed by the man himself. Lee Diffie will be returning to the second half of the season when they swap, when the Fox package ends at the beginning of the season, of course, being on Fox with Mike Joy and the crew.
Yeah, of course.
Lee Diffie is coming back. Very excited. He called some great races
He
last
did.
year.
I liked it. I like his energy, just, a little bit of a change of pace, but I love his inflection. He really gets into it, and I think he adds something to the sport, just a little bit, perhaps not as conventional as some people might think, but I don't know. I just love it. And, anything from the broadcast of some things that NBC provides, whether it's soccer matches, we're talking about like overseas or horse racing. I thought it was fantastic.
Lee Diffie brought such energy to that Daytona race that I ended up. It really added to that last lap win for Harrison Burton.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
It made it really, the camera showed his family emotional and Jeff Burton watching his son win his first race. But I think that Lee Diffie call where he says, like, your little boy has done it, it just really put the cherry on top. That Daytona race, probably top 3 races of the season, up there probably with Homestead as well. And it was a lot of fun to hear him, and I'm really glad that it seems like this deal with Lee Diffie calling NASCAR races is going to continue into the future, because that guy he just comes up with some lines, and they're really, really good and memorable, and that's what you need. You need your prime Gus Johnson kind of guy. I mean, we lost a really, really, really good commentator when Darrell Waltrip retired for Fox, and it seems like Fox hasn't really had a true identity since then. Of course, Mike Joy is a legendary broadcaster, but not in his prime anymore, of course, being in the industry for so long. But having a new voice like Lee Diffie, who truly seems like he is just in love with sports, is really great to hear. Like I mentioned, like Gus Johnson just sounds like he's in love with football whenever he calls it.
Yeah, as much as we don't like his affinity with Ohio State, but that's okay.
Maserati mom.
Yeah, it was getting annoying with some of those college football games. Also, hate that all the big games on Fox are always at noon, but that's a different story.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, no, just someone that's really passionate about whatever it is that they're broadcasting. You could really feel that, not just through knowledge, because there's a lot of folks that could be knowledgeable about something. It's very different to be knowledgeable and then very passionate about it. To be able to feel that inflection, especially when you're going through a NASCAR race, and maybe it's just a little bit humdrum at some parts of the race. There's not a lot of changes. Everyone is still in the same formation and lineup, and you're going through laps. But still, he just keeps up the energy throughout the entirety of the race. Still, tries to be as attention grabbing as possible. Any little tiny thing, and he's out there watching. Don't you worry. So, love it. Great decision, in my opinion, and I do think that that's going to be adding to the intensity, especially just at that point of the season, where at least with this playoff format, you got to pay a lot more attention. You might have to take a little bit more risks. And just like last year, you could see a few more of those risks taken to start to secure those last few playoff spots that might be available.
Yeah, and it's a good segue into the next spot of drivers this year that probably really want to end their playoff droughts or their losing droughts, like their winless droughts. And I think at the top of the list is probably Kyle Busch. Not used to seeing him not in victory lane.
Oh, yeah, obviously.
Just going an entire year without seeing Rowdy in victory lane was just very strange. It's going to be interesting to see how he bounces back. I mean, if he was with Joe Gibbs still, I wouldn't be surprised to see him bounce back. I don't think he would have had a down season last year if he wasn't with Richard Childress. But this year we could see what Rowdy is capable of. I mean, he said at the end of the last year, he's like, maybe I'm a washed up old dog, and it was heartbreaking to hear, watching him in his heyday. I mean, when I started watching NASCAR, it was 2007. 2008 was one of the greatest greatest regular seasons of Kyle Busch's career. I mean, he had 8 wins, and then he had, of course, the bad start to the chase that he was never able to recover from. 2008 probably should have been his year the first time. But Kyle Busch, he seems like a different driver in that 8. It doesn't seem like he's as aggressive as he was in his 18 days or even his 5 days when he was with Hendrick. Another guy who I've been rooting for, obviously, Bubba Wallace, last win in 2022 out in Kansas. He looked like he had it for so many races. I mean, Talladega leading at the white flag in 2023 just to end up in that crash, being too aggressive on the blocks. He had Texas in 2023 where it looked like he was going to win a playoff race and advance, and then late restart gave William Byron the win instead. He looked really good early on at Darlington in the Southern 500 last year. There's so many races where he looked good at Indy, and then of course Keselowski, Blaney, and Larson ended up taking control of that race. And it just seemed like there were so many races where Bubba Wallace had it in the bag and just wasn't meant to be. Of course, he's getting a new crew chief this year, and my biggest criticism of the 2311 team has been Tyler Reddick's crew looks amazing, and then Bubba Wallace's crew is just finding a new way to mess up on pit road sometimes.
It's like, spread around that wealth. But, behind the scenes, folks, and obviously they're not behind the scenes. Your pit crews are right out there with you. But to make sure that you have full faith and trust in those guys, it just goes such a long way. And you don't need to be well-seasoned and very knowledgeable fan to know that, of course. And that is something with this season that will be an interesting change, just to see how some of those guys that were on that playoff bubble can make perhaps a little bit of a jump. Bubba Wallace, definitely one big one to see. Hey, is he going to be one that is going to be a mainstay for 2311? Is he going to make that next jump this season and be a playoff driver, be someone who is getting on the right side of wins as opposed to on the wrong side? And Buescher, too. I really just, as for drivers in general, just thinking about the field, he was another one who, didn't make the cut but still had an incredible season. And there's a lot of guys out there that are going to be, wanting to make some positive changes for themselves and, try to figure out, all right, what do I need to do to, not have bad luck or not to just be able to, make that cut as opposed to falling short on the other side, because it sucks when you just end up falling short when you're good enough to make it.
Yeah, and we've seen it a lot, especially with Buescher and Chastain and Bubba.
him too.
Like last year, those were three guys. Busch too. I mean, Busch's luck was just terrible last year.
Bad.
Just so many times he had that race won. I think what was that, Kansas? I think it was Kansas. He was leading late, and then Briscoe kind of squeezed him in the wall, and he took him out from the lead, and looked like it was coming. That streak was going to stay alive. He had the race. He was leading the summer Daytona race until turn 3, and then Parker Retzlaff, pushes Harrison Burton, a guy who's never won before. He keeps the streak alive.
Yep, there you go.
But it just you don't know what luck is going to deal you, because especially at like super speedways or. You're just wrong place, wrong time sometimes. And you just want to mitigate. You can't really plan for something like that, but what you can do is minimize your mistakes. Like I said, we've seen it with Bubba. Bubba had a great start to the season last year, where for a short time, I think for like a 2-race period, he was the points leader. And then just like 3 races in a row, just bad pit stops, a mistake. There was one race where they just over-tightened the bolt on his car, and then it ended his day. And, it's just something stupid like that, and that ended up being... That 3-race stint ended up being what kept him out of the playoffs. Of course, you can make the argument, it's like, well, if he wins, it doesn't matter. But, at the same time, there's enough positions there that you can just point your way in for a reason. And Bubba was very, very consistent, but just not enough. I think, super speedways have been his best bet. He's a great super speedway racer. Obviously, the wins don't tell the full story. Only one race win, his first career win at Talladega, coming, 2021, I believe, 2021. And he has a great average finish at Daytona, usually always there at the end. 2 runner-up finishes at the 500. He's always there. And just it seems like he just can't take that next step yet. And I think he can. I mean, 2311 has proven that they're now not just a good race team, now that they're a championship contending race team, as we saw with Tyler Reddick. I mean, Tyler Reddick ended up having a career year last year.
Yeah, my guy.
Absolute.
Oh, yes.
I don't want to say a surprise, but I didn't know he could be that consistent. Of course, he has race wins before then, but he just looked super, super consistent. And he was another one of those guys who just on the wrong side of luck at times, just always coming up second. He had it. He was going to chase down Alex Bowman to win that Chicago street race, and then brushes the wall, driving it too hard. So he's still young. Bubba's, he's only in his 30s. They are early 30s. They both have plenty of time left to put everything together, and I think 2025 will be real telling. I mean, Bubba signed an extension with 2311, so he's there for the long haul. I think 2311 right now, Riley Herbst to be determined as their new driver in their 35 car, I believe. The newest driver added to that team time will only tell if that's a good setup. But I think Reddick and Wallace are the best drivers for 2311. I think they're very good faces of that team. Wouldn't be surprised if their lifers there, finish off their careers with 2311. It's just going to depend on can this pit crew be better for Bubba, and can Bubba put a full race together? Because like Darlington, he was good. He got the pole, led the laps early on, and then as soon as the sun went down, he was just almost a non-factor. Caught up in a wreck very, very late that ended his chance at the playoffs. But he's always battling for it. So he's one of the guys who I think people are going to keep an extra close eye on in 2025, especially with the lawsuit that's going on and with those slow developments. But between him, Kyle Busch, like I said, trying to end those losing streaks. We might see, Truex could end up, before he calls it a career, one last shot at the 500. Never won on a super speedway before, no matter, that whole Hall of Fame career he's had. Just not finding the right luck on a super speedway. So.
No, it's yeah, that's just how it could be sometimes. And this is such a big factor when you could look at a wide variety of sports, but NASCAR definitely a little bit more heightened than some others. There's just such a huge luck factor because you're not just relying on your own ability as, say an athlete, like a track runner or a volleyball player, or even a football player, quarterback in some senses. There's definitely a luck factor when it comes to team sports, but you're dealing with yourself, you're dealing with a pit crew, you're dealing with an automobile, you're dealing with a machine, and things can happen, things can go wrong. Just like when you're even as just an average Joe, someone driving out on the highway. You might be a fantastic driver. You might have a perfect record. You might not have ever even gotten pulled over for a speeding ticket, but some other idiot could make a mistake on the road and cause a wreck or hit you, and it has nothing to do with your ability as a driver. Anything you did is just, hey,
Wrong place, wrong time.
Yep, exactly. There you go. Wrong place, wrong time. And when you got all these guys going around a track at whatever miles per hour at whatever point of the race it is, it's fast. That mistakes are bound to happen, and it's just some of these drivers have seemingly been a little bit more present for some of their own mistakes or just mistakes of the drivers around them than others, and that's just where the luck factor comes into play. You just got to hope that is something that can change for the better over time, and that would lead to drivers like Buescher, like Bubba, or McDowell, him as well, to make a stride. Maybe Gilliland, he was kind of in the middle of the pack for some of these races this year. So guys that can try to elevate from that 16th, 17th place, 20th place to try to ease their way a little bit closer to the top 10, and we'll see if that happens for some of these guys.
There are of course tiers to these drivers of who are the regular front runners, the middle of the pack guys, and then the back of the pack guys and teams.
Kaz Grala.
You leave Kaz Grala alone. I love that guy. Yeah, so you have, of course, like a guy like Kyle Larson, Denny Hamlin, William Byron, those guys who every week you're like, okay, they'll probably, they'll be towards the front, they'll be competing. Christopher Bell, especially in these last few years, has really come on strong.
Yes, he has.
And then, like, middle of the pack drivers, I think, guys like Bubba Wallace, Chase Briscoe. I'll be interested to see how Chase Briscoe does on the 19 team. Of course, his time at Stewart-Haas was when Stewart-Haas was really on the decline, and still managed to win a couple races in his time there. Of course, got to see it live at the Southern 500 last year. And now you go to Gibbs, who, they've have the 2 championships with Kyle Busch and perennial playoff contender with Denny Hamlin, and how Ty Gibbs is slowly developing. And now you get Chase Briscoe, who shows he can win big races, of course, winning his way into the playoffs last season. It feels like when you see a quarterback in the NFL on like a losing team, and then he goes, to or I should say like a wide receiver on a losing team. Like if you put, let's say Garrett Wilson, you give him to like the like, why am I blanking on teams all of a sudden? Put him on the Chiefs, for example. Give him a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes. Then it's like, okay, he's probably going to thrive much better than he has than a team that has been offensively stagnant the last few years. It's very similar where we saw in 2023 with Harvick's last season, he was really carrying Stewart-Haas and still just putting up good numbers, still not enough to win. So if one of the greatest drivers and probably the best driver of the 2010s can't win on a team, how is anyone else really going to win on the team? But going to Gibbs, really, really excited to see what Briscoe can do. But he's, at the moment, sort of like that middle-of-the-pack driver. I think Bubba's probably the best of the middle-pack driver. The guys you'll regularly see, getting some top 10s, some top 5s, maybe even stealing a win, but not being that elite driver just yet. But anything can happen. We could see any of these new teams, these new driver matchups. We have Josh Berry going to the Wood Brothers, Noah Gragson going to the 4. We don't really know how things are going to roll out. I mean, Riley Herbst could light the world on fire, and we don't even know it.
It's going to be interesting to see that some of these guys, between the young guns and some of the guys that still have a chip on their shoulder going into some of these later season races. Some of these guys that have been through different formats, some of these guys that have only raced in the same format in this playoff system, and just how this is going to mesh this year. I'm excited for it. And between any behind the scenes changes, some of these rule changes, broadcasting changes. Just hopeful that it's all going to be for the better, and as we always try to go into these shows, just trying to push people towards the sport. Give it a chance, as we are going to be doing plenty of times this season with these drivers. And find yourself a driver. Find yourself someone that you could latch onto, that you could back up and be a fan of for whatever reason. And everyone has their reasons, whether it be nationality, whether it be just someone that you see as a better chance of winning than someone else, or maybe someone else just likes a certain brand for a driver, or just literally the color of their car. And that's something too, Adam. I know we have to update here in this first show the couple different sponsors and companies that have left the sport as well this year.
Yeah, very sad to see some longtime sponsors leaving the sport. The biggest out of all of them, of course, being Denny Hamlin and FedEx. The rumored split ended up coming true this offseason with FedEx leaving the sport. So that iconic FedEx 11 thing of the past now. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what they keep on the car now.
Yeah, whether you love them or hate them, you know it well.
You know that car. It felt like one of the last few iconic cars out there, that real driver sponsorship duo. Right?
Yeah.
Other than him, it feels like Larson with Hendrick Cars and then Logano with Shell. And it feels like those two are the last ones.
I still definitely see his, of course, as iconic. Just Bush with the M&Ms. He hasn't, that's obviously a thing of the past, but that was so iconic. You miss those iconic brands, like Stewart had with Home Depot and Jimmy Johnson had with Lowe's. It's definitely something that has changed, and we discussed this in previous podcasts, how when you could pair up that driver to a sponsor and you're seeing them more frequently on TV, you're seeing them in commercials. It's just something, as you got out of the 2000s and early 2010s, that you just haven't seen as much. And you'll know in a bigger way and in more of a casual sense that NASCAR is back even more if that can start to happen again. That instead of basketball players, instead of NFL players on commercials, you're seeing some NASCAR drivers again.
Yeah, I would love to see the marketing pick back up. I mean, you had like Dale Jr. and Tony Stewart in music videos in the early 2000s.
Yeah, you can't forget about Dale Jr. But yeah, no, even to that point.
That's probably the best point you could make, actually, was when Jr. announced he was running that late model 8 Budweiser. That was the best-selling car diecast on vinyl for the whole year.
I got it. That was, I have it. I have one somewhere back home in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, it is a driver sponsor combination that has not been on the racetrack in almost 20 years, and still people associate Dale Jr. with Budweiser. So I think it is super important for NASCAR, depending on how this lawsuit goes, to really drive down costs for teams, because then they don't need to get like 15 sponsors to cover a season. I mean, last year alone, Bubba Wallace, I probably can't even name all the ones, but I know he had DoorDash, McDonald's, Columbia, Mobile One.
Did he have Money Lion too?
Money Lion, yes, he did have Money Lion. And that's just like, a handful. So that's 5 different paint schemes. And it was a real thing back in the day when drivers had different paint schemes. It was always something like, oh, this is really unique. You're not used to seeing it. Like when Jeff Gordon, he drove, DuPont every week, shows up with the Pepsi scheme, and it's like, oh, this is really nice. This is a special occasion, probably like a Daytona race or something, or the Coke 600 or something. Jimmy Johnson, even, like, he ran that Lowe's, the blue, black, and yellow scheme, and then he shows up with the Cobalt Tool silver, and it's like, well, this race is over already before we started. That thing just dominated every time. I have nightmares about that car. As beautiful as it was, I have nightmares of Jimmy Johnson just putting that thing in victory lane easily. Just it was just so special. But like now, there's really no like super iconic schemes, and I think that's a real identity crisis for NASCAR. You don't have that recognition of just looking at a picture and being like, oh yeah, that's Dale, or that's Bubba Wallace, that's Tyler Reddick, that's Brad Keselowski. And Brad Keselowski, another one. They lost. They gained Kroger. Kind of stole that from Ricky Stenhouse Jr. But they lost King's Hawaiian. Sadly, I love that car so much.
I know, right? I like that scheme, and that's what I mean. You get some fun paint schemes like that and sponsors, and that's just been something that has been so wrapped up in NASCAR that it's just been so easy in that time when we were growing up, when NASCAR was just a lot more fun seemingly and just a lot more iconic and just easy to match up. Like if you just had a blind test of all these sponsors, usually you put them on like a piece of paper and say, yeah, can you name the driver that was lined up with that? Yeah, no, it's something that would be so difficult today. Maybe we'll get back to that at some point, but
I'd like to see that.
Yeah, it's just, it would be great because that's just something that made NASCAR so fun. It's like, oh man, I love that car. I love that driver, and they're just a perfect match. It's like I don't see this brand or this company without thinking of that NASCAR driver, maybe, or at least having them in some manner of thought when you see this brand, just because of the recognition. Still a bit of a climb to get back there because especially post pandemic as we've gone into this decade, it's still lacking, and there's definitely some effort that needs to be put in place. It's straight up, yeah, it is just marketing, but from a fan standpoint, it's definitely a little bit more than that.
Yeah, it is, and you will get some brand loyalty if you have some sponsorship, like driver sponsorship relationship, like a long-lasting one. I mean, like I said, for the longest time, I've told this story several times. Like growing up, I did not want to go to Lowe's ever. I always wanted to go to Home Depot when my dad needed something. And now, as an adult, I understand that Lowe's is more convenient for at least where we live. But I still have an impartial bias towards Home Depot because I wasn't even a fan of Tony Stewart during, like, the majority of years I watched Tony Stewart. He was in the 14. I watched Tony Stewart in the 20 for 2 years.
Okay.
So my association in those 2 years was Home Depot, Tony Stewart. And then, I have that sort of brand loyalty with like Old Spice and stuff like that, or as much as I don't like Burger King, but I still associate it with Tony Stewart because of the Coke 600, or not the Coke 600, the Coke 400 win he had when he turned Kyle Busch into the wall for the win. Just that car it was so beautiful that it stays in my mind, and it's like, oh yeah, there's.
Well, to be fair though, I mean, yeah, to be fair, you had to still not have the best working hours or experience with Burger King in college.
I did not like Burger King.
So that's not always going to be a fun time,
No.
especially when you're dealing with that and work and food service and school at the same time. So, yeah, not always going to lead to the best memories. So, I feel you.
Yeah, but you did give me an idea for a fun game we might be able to play on a future episode of doing maybe a past versus present a little trivia game where you go for a team or a sponsor, and you say like good. I'll make an easy one. Obviously, it's like Good Wrench. Who did Good Wrench sponsor in 2000? It's like, oh yeah, Dale Earnhardt, easy. And then it's like, okay, make it a little harder. It's like who did WeatherTech sponsor in 2025? And it's like, well, don't know. Race didn't happen yet. But something similar to that. So maybe we'll have a little game down the line for one of our final turn segments in the future.
I like that as we close things out and as we look on to this season. And one thing, of course, I'm excited about going into February is that we are going to be in attendance for the first race at Bowman Gray. Of course, it's still just an initial race. It doesn't count for anything other than just some really good racing, setting the tone for the season, and getting the NASCAR season kicked off. And that's going to be something that as we go into our next show, likely, or as we start to actually break things down, actually analyze a little bit more, likely late in January. But we're hoping to gather some video, get some interesting segments together. It's still something that we're trying to get a better feel for, see what works, see what is going to be made available to us. But it's going to be a great year, and we hope to get to as many tracks around the Carolinas, even Atlanta, as we can this season. Hot Atlanta, yeah, because just being in the middle of South Carolina, just luckily have that ability to be within driving distance to a lot of great tracks, plenty of great cities, and I think that's about where we're going to leave things for the moment.
Yeah, I think so. A good long recap of everything that happened this offseason, everything that's going into 2025. Of course, didn't touch on everything, but, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to touch too much on the slow developments in the lawsuit. I'd basically have to be reading off Bob Pockrass's or Jeff Gluck's Twitter accounts. For big thanks to them for breaking that stuff down for the non-legal minds and the fans. But that thing's slow development. All we got right now is that 2311 and Front Row are going to be full-time racing in 2025. And it looks like, like I said, not a lawyer, so I can't make an expert take on it, but looks like things are looking good for the 2311 Front Row side of things. Looks like the early favorings are going towards them. So maybe we will see some more changes in the probably not this year, maybe not even next year. This is these lawsuits are very, very long-winded and take a lot of time. But we are seeing it develop as it happens, and could be shaping hopefully a better era for NASCAR and its fans and its race teams, because we want, like I said, we want those sponsors back, we want that recognition back, we want the popularity back, and we want the sport to grow. And I've mentioned it a few times. It was like the reason we get so upset sometimes about the way things are in NASCAR is because we love the sport so much that we want the best for it. We want. If NASCAR can get back to that, how much were they averaging? Like 10 million eyes per race or something, like 10 to 8 to 10 million, instead of like the 2 million that we've been getting through the playoffs. We just want it to get back to where it was probably like the second biggest sport in America at one point, behind the NFL. We want it to be there. NASCAR, the golden age may be unattainable again, but it doesn't hurt to try and fix it.
No, and we're not marketing experts. We're not experts in things that go on behind the scenes. With the folks that make these decisions, it's easier to critique than to come up with ideas. But we want to see things that come out of NASCAR that come from the brass, that trickle their way down to the drivers and obviously the fans, that can make a better experience going to races, and also viewing experiences on television or streaming, however you work to see and watch these races. And we'll see how that's going to play out in 2025. Much more hopeful for a second half of this decade with viewership ratings and interest as we saw for the first half. And that all starts now. So thank you again for listening, for anyone who's made it this far. This has been the Palmetto Pit Stop, so thank you so much for stopping by. We are based, again, as a reminder, out of Irmo, South Carolina, just outside of the capital city of Columbia. We hope to do a lot of these episodes this year and get out to some of those races. Bowman Gray will be coming up before we know it. I'm Tony, here with Adam, and as always, we will see you next time.